Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and just start off by discussing the historiography of the Battle of Cold Harbor. But if you visit the battlefield of Cold Harbor today, you're not going to find any monuments like that of Gettysburg, nor are there statues dedicated to its commanders. Instead, a small visitor center and a driving tour takes tourists around the Union Sixth Corps' position during the battle. More towards the end of the driving tour, there's a humble little monument that's actually dedicated to the 2nd Connecticut Volunteer Heavy Artillery. And this monument is going to list those that were casualties on 1 June 1864. This was 2 days before the actual assault took place. And there's no indication of who won this bloody battle. Past historians and former Confederate veterans point to Grant's failure to break the Confederate line, leaving the public to conclude that it was this Union disaster. These sympathies used evidence from Grant's memoirs. Grant said 20 years after the battle, "I have always regretted that the last assault at Cold Harbor was ever made. At Cold Harbor, no advantage whatsoever was gained to compensate for the heavy loss we sustained." However, Grant never mentioned how he successfully withdrew from Cold Harbor, but several events occurring in his life prevented him from providing that nuance. He was in need of money and he was dying of throat cancer. He even said that he wished that he could have gone back to rewrite the chapter on Cold Harbor. But there's a lot of indications through a lot of history that's been written that it was a Union defeat. However, it's much more complicated if we begin to actually look at the historiography of the Battle of Cold Harbor. Union General Andrew Humphreys published the Virginia campaigns of 1864 and 1865 in 1885. He identifies the failure to break the Confederate position as a tactical failure, but he leads on believing that Lee never accomplished what he intended, either following 3 failed offensives against the Union line. Confederate General John Brown Gordon published his reminiscences of the Civil War in 1904. He recalled the battle as one of Lee's most significant victories. The extreme loss of life for the Union defined the battle, which he justified, noting the Union soldiers' refusal to advance. Similarly, Douglas Southall Freeman viewed Cold Harbor as a Confederate victory in his multi-volume work on R.E. Lee, published in 1934. He characterized the battle as famously Robert E. Lee's last field victory. He found the casualties equally defined Grant's defeat on 3 June. However, unlike Gordon, Freeman did explain the movements following the assault and understood Lee's difficult position after the fact. Freeman did not say, though, how this affected the results of the battle. A few years prior to the publication of Freeman's work, British military theorist J.F.C. Fuller published The Generalship of Ulysses S. Grant in 1929. He praised Grant's generalship. He does not spend much time on Cold Harbor, but calls it a battle which has been given the prominence it does not deserve in the history of the Civil War. It was not a great battle or a decisive one. Lee's losses were slight and Grant's not excessive. Fuller analyzes the battle and finds that a breakthrough could have occurred, but it would not have pushed Lee back into Richmond. He did not characterize the results of the battle in his early work on Grant. Bruce Catton took a similar approach in his 1969 work, Grant Takes Command. He concluded that it neither robbed Grant's army of the initiative, imposed a serious delay on it, nor forced it to abandon its original plan. These works on the Overland Campaign and the campaigns of 1864 indicate that Cold Harbor was just one piece of this military campaign. There wasn't really any individual work that existed. One of the first actual works that came about on Cold Harbor was published in 2001 by Ernest Ferguson, entitled Not War, But Murder, Cold Harbor, 1864. His work was one of the most recent accounts of the battle. He defined Cold Harbor as a Confederate victory, with Grant failing to give Meade proper command. A year later, Gordon Ray gave a more sympathetic account of the battle, entitled Cold Harbor, Grant and Lee, 26 May to 3 June, 1864. Unlike Ferguson, Ray does not find Confederate success on 3 June due to Lee, but his subordinate commanders really are responsible for that victory. And in another single work, Hurricane from the Heavens, published in 2014, Daniel Davis and Philip Greenwald assessed the outcomes of the failed 3 June assault. It's a great battlefield guide, but it hardly characterizes the battle and the results itself, as it stops on the 5th of June. Finally, Ray's last work, On to Petersburg, was published in 2017, which focused on Grant's movements from the June 4th to about June 12th. He doesn't indicate if it was a Union victory, but ironically, he says it was either inconclusive or it was a Confederate tactical victory in a battlefield tour that he was giving after he wrote this book. The last work is by Earl Hess, entitled Trench Warfare in the Overland Campaign. He does not characterize the end result of the battle, but it was a turning point in the campaign with the use of entrenchments. But ultimately, all of these works provide a more complex account of how to define the outcome in the Battle of Cold Harbor, which is what my dissertation will explore. Thank you.